Hi, boys and girls. We are continuing with lesson 9, and I'd like you to open up your activity book to page 9.1, like you see on my screen. And I'd like you to find chapter 12 in your reader, which begins on page 100. So go ahead and find those two things. Make sure you have them both out. And we are going to continue finding the main idea as we read. So we're going to be reading chapter 12 together. And as we read, we're going to write down some main ideas from this section. Now, I want you to pay attention to how I do this because on part 2, tomorrow, you're going to do the same thing with another chapter. So let's get started with chapter 12, Julius Caesar, the later years. As you heard in the previous read aloud, Gallic soldiers were not able to put up much of a fight in some areas, and so Julius Caesar thought he was going to be able to conquer Gaul quite easily. The Romans thought the people in Gaul were uncivilized, and they wanted to conquer them so they would adopt Roman ways and culture. Remember, uncivilized means kind of rowdy and not using their manners. But the Gauls, led by a powerful Gallic chieftain named Vercingetorix, I think that's how you say it, rose up and rebelled against him. Vercingetorix united several powerful Gallic tribes, and for a few months it appeared as though the Gauls might be able to succeed against this Roman conqueror. Unfortunately for the Gauls, Julius Caesar and his legions would not be easy to defeat. Caesar's men would follow him anywhere. Julius Caesar was loved by soldiers because he favored being out in front of his army, fighting alongside the common soldiers. His men respected him for it, even though it may have terrified them to see their leader so close to danger. So, one main idea that we're going to write down from these pages, from this page, is that Julius Caesar conquered, not sure why my pen is skipping, conquered Gaul. You could also write down he was admired by his soldiers. I think I'll write that down. Admired by his soldiers or his legions. All right, let's continue reading. Aside from being courageous, Julius Caesar was a brilliant commander. He kept up with the latest in Roman technology, and his armies fielded weapons that the Gauls had never imagined. Julius Caesar favored the ballista in battle, which was like a giant catapult or crossbow used to throw weapons. The Gauls were terrified when they faced the ballista on the battlefield. And we're turning over to page 102. Julius Caesar put all his technology to use during one particular siege, the battle in which he finally defeated Vercingetorix. A siege is a long, drawn-out battle in which one army has retreated behind the fortress walls of its city, and the other army surrounds the fortress and tries to break in. A siege could take months or even years to resolve. If the one army could not break down the city walls or climb over them, then they would wait until the defenders in the city ran out of food and water. So the main idea I think we need to write down from here is that, and I'm going to use his last name because once you've written about a famous person, you can use their last name. Caesar they called him courageous and a brilliant commander. He used technology in battle. So he was a little bit ahead of his time in his forward thinking and use of technology. Now, boys and girls, make sure you pause the video if you need to write down what I have written down. All right, we're going to continue. So the next section, I want you to listen for what you think might be the main idea. Thanks to the ballista and other weapons used in battle, Julius Caesar was able to force the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix to surrender. Vercingetorix spent several years in jail and was killed when Caesar finally returned home. Moving on to page 103. When he returned to Rome, Julius Caesar threw a military parade for himself called a triumph. In this parade, Gallic warriors were in chains. Commander Julius Caesar and his soldiers marched around Rome showing off prizes and basking in cheers and applause from the citizens of Rome. While Julius Caesar had many admirers, he still had many enemies. To his enemies' horror, Julius Caesar had returned to Rome more powerful than ever. I want you to think about why Julius Caesar may have had enemies and why they were in horror when they saw he returned. Let's turn over to page 104, and we're going to think about what the main idea is in this big paragraph. Before marching his army into Rome, Julius Caesar had led his legions across the Rubicon River in northern Italy and then south into the city of Rome. Marching an army into Rome was against an old Roman law. By crossing the Rubicon River, Caesar was perceived as a threat who might try to take over the government. Julius Caesar knew that what he had done would start a civil war. This meant that Romans were going to fight against each other. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, he said, "The die is cast," meaning that he knew exactly what would happen if he crossed the Rubicon, and he was ready to see if Fortuna would favor his bravery. So, our next main idea that we can write down is he crossed the Rubicon River and this started a civil war, and he knew it was going to start a civil war. This started a civil war. All right, moving on, I'm going to read a larger section, and I want you to be thinking about what we might write for our next part. Caesar's old ally, Pompey, was now his greatest enemy. Pompey did not like all the power and glory Caesar had. Pompey raised an army of his own to fight Caesar. It was a bloody civil war that lasted several years. Through it all, Julius Caesar remained a hero to most plebeians. During his time in Roman politics, Caesar preferred passing laws that favored the lowly over the rich in Roman society and members of the Senate. In the end, Caesar's army won the civil war, and Pompey was killed. Caesar unexpectedly had mercy on many of his other enemies within Rome. Rather than kill all of his enemies, as most ancient Roman leaders would have done, Caesar tried to heal the wounds of civil war by trying to unite Romans. Caesar was now the dictator of Rome, meaning he was the main ruler who could make decisions without needing the approval of consuls. This was very different from the process of checks and balances, which the Romans had relied upon to control the power of the consuls. Julius Caesar and his armies continued to conquer other lands, extending Rome's influence throughout nearly all of the Mediterranean. After one battle, Caesar famously claimed, "Veni, vidi, vici," meaning in Latin, I came, I saw, I conquered. So in this section, Caesar becomes what? Do you remember? He becomes the dictator, meaning he's the only one in control. He has taken control. All right, continuing at the bottom of page 105, again, we're listening for what the main idea is. Julius Caesar wanted to import wheat, among other things, from Egypt into Rome. Thanks to the lush farmland along the Nile, there was enough wheat in Egypt to feed all of Rome. Julius Caesar crossed the Mediterranean Sea to seize Egypt's wealth. Once there, however, Caesar met Queen Cleopatra, and instead he fell in love. Cleopatra was considered to be an extraordinary person. She was incredibly smart and clever. When Cleopatra walked into a room, everyone wanted to hear what she had to say. Cleopatra was involved in her own political problems and civil war in Egypt. She was fighting her brother, Ptolemy, for control of the Egyptian throne. Caesar helped her settle her problem by having Ptolemy killed. After Ptolemy's death, Cleopatra became queen of Egypt, and much-needed shipments of Egyptian wheat were soon exported to Rome. So here, boys and girls, we learn about Julius Caesar's love interest. So Caesar fell in love with Cleopatra. There we go. All right, our last section, again, listening for the main idea. Eventually, Caesar's enemies gained the upper hand. They worried that as Caesar became more powerful, he might declare himself king. Many members of the Senate became jealous and wanted to remove Caesar from power. In one of history's most famous deaths, Caesar was killed on the floor of the Roman Senate. It was the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BCE, meaning before the Common Era. 60 Roman senators, led by Junius Brutus, secretly plotted to murder Caesar in the Roman Senate. According to legend, Julius Caesar's last words were, "Et tu, Brute?" This means, "And you, Brutus?" Caesar was surprised to discover that Brutus, someone he considered an ally, was a part of the plan to murder him. For all the troubles he faced during his time as dictator of Rome, Julius Caesar died a hero in the eyes of most Roman people. So in the end, Caesar was killed by Brutus, who Caesar thought was an ally, a friend of his, someone that was rooting for him, but he was not. Boys and girls, make sure that you have everything written down, and then you're going to be submitting this part of 9.1 on Schoology.